It was January 20th, 2019, a day which will live in infamy. I was in my favorite recliner in the rectory with a cold beverage. I will not name what kind of cold beverage it was. With a bowl of popcorn, getting ready to watch the NFC championship game between our beloved, the most privileged, the most awesome New Orleans Saints and those no good, dirty scoundrels, Los Angeles Rams. The game was tight. It was a magnificent game until that one call, until that one play, where I think people from China were even calling in and saying, we saw that foul, we saw what happened. And after the game, Drew Brees, being the saintly man that he was, said, no, it didn't affect the game. It didn't affect the game whatsoever. It was on to the next play. And I love Drew Brees, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to call him a liar in that moment. It affected the game, all right? The momentum had shifted, and you've seen that a victory was there. It was in our grasp, and overtime happened, and then the inevitable happened, which was the Los Angeles Rams cheated their way. Excuse me, I apologize. I'm almost over it. I promise I'm almost over it. Won the NFC Championship game and then lost ridiculously bad to the New England Patriots. Okay, but I'm over it. Okay. I'm sorry. My brothers and sisters, there was a clear momentum shift in that game, and we saw it very clearly, and the expletives that I yelled at the TV after that was a very display of what was actually happening. In our gospel today, we have a clear momentum shift as well. What is the momentum shift? Not to be too morbid, but I'm going to be morbid. It was death and it was judgment. Those were the momentum shifts, right? The rich young man had everything. He had everything. He dined sumptuously. He wore the finest clothing. He was the man, as we would say it here on this earth. He was, quote unquote, living his best life, as the youngins say today. And then you had Lazarus, who had nothing, who was begging for food at the rich young man's doorstep, who even the dogs came and licked his wounds. That's how horrible this man, his life was. And then the momentum shift happened, death and judgment. And then the person that had everything was now in torment. And the person who had nothing was now at peace with God. There was a momentum shift, my brothers and sisters, and that's something that we have to clearly look at in this gospel today. In our church today, the number one thing we try to preach is mercy, God's mercy. And we have to be reminded that mercy is for the here and for the now. We can only enact God's mercy here and now. That's why I sit in the confessional 30 minutes to an hour before every Mass, because I long to give God's mercy. That's why I heard 5 hours of confessions this weekend at the Steubenville conference. That's why I'm energized right now, because I was able to give God's mercy. I was able to hand out $100 bills in the confessional, right? God's mercy is here and it's now. After death and after judgment, we can no longer enter into God's mercy. There is judgment, and we will be judged on what we do in the here and the now. How we have enacted God's mercy, how we have turned away from sinfulness, how we have given charity to the people around us. That is what judgment will be. And I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters, there will not be a reversal of calls. There will not be a new rule change that says that we can go back and review. Why? Because the referee in this situation is not biased. He's not imperfect. He's not flawed. He sees clearly everything. He calls every penalty. He doesn't call ones that are not penalties. That's what we have to forget, as if God was blind, as if God was someone that we could just hide things from. He is God, and we are not. He is the one who will judge, and we are the one who will be judged. We'll be judged if we dine sumptuously, if we glorify ourselves instead of glorifying God. How many beautiful, wonderful gifts we have here at this parish. And if we use it only to glorify ourselves, then we have built our own kingdom instead of building God's kingdom. God calls us to build God's kingdom, not to build our own kingdom. We're not the ones who are God. He is God. And so, my brothers and sisters, as we come to receive another gift from God in the Eucharist, let us continue to remember that we should use those gifts to glorify God. and not glorify ourselves. This weekend, as I talk about explaining the Mass, last weekend I talked about the history of the Mass, how the Mass developed over the years. This weekend I'm talking about something that's kind of controversial right now in our Mass. It is the difference between what they call the extraordinary form of the Mass, or some of you know it, the Old Latin Mass, and the ordinary form of the Mass, what we celebrate here, also known as the Novus Ordo. And instead of just giving you my own words, I'm going to give you the last authoritative teaching that we have from the popes. And this is from Pope Benedict XVI. He wrote a document in 2007 called Summorum Pontificum, and he explains the differences between both of these masses. So these are his words. The Roman Missal, promulgated by Pope Paul VI, is the ordinary expression of the rule of prayer of the Catholic Church, of the Latin Rite. The Roman Missal, promulgated by St. Pius V and revised by Blessed John XXIII, is nonetheless to be considered an extraordinary expression of the same rule of prayer of the Church, and duly honored for its venerable and ancient usage. These two expressions of the Church's rule of prayer will in no way lead to a division in the Church's rule of faith, for they are two usages of the Roman Rite. It is therefore permitted to celebrate the sacrifice of the Mass following the typical edition of the Roman Missal, which was promulgated by Blessed John XXIII in 1962, and never abrogated, never done away with, as an extraordinary form of the Church's liturgy. The conditions of the use of this Missal, laid down by the previous documents, they're in Latin, so I'm not going to name them, are replaced as follows. And so he goes with the rules of those things. In our church today, we have people that, at least in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that look down on people that wanted to go to the Latin Mass as backwards thinking and as not being progressive. In today's age, we have people that love the Latin Mass, that look down on the people that want to go to the Novus Ordo, or the ordinary form of the Mass, as not worshiping God right or anything like that. The Pope is saying that there should not be division in this moment, that there are two forms of the Mass, and they should be held in both held in honor, right? And I think we have to constantly remind ourselves of that. Why should we try to look down on people who want to go and worship God? That is ridiculous, right? Why should we try to stop people and judge people if they want to go and worship God in Latin or in English or in Spanish or in Portuguese or whatever other language? God is worshipped in both sacraments. The Eucharist comes to us in both sacraments. We should not make enemies of friends. We have enough enemies. So let us try to live together both in the ordinary and the extraordinary form. Let us make sure that we honor the Latin Mass just as much as we honor the Mass that we celebrate here. And if you're interested in going to a Latin Mass, we have two in our diocese. One is in Gibson at Blessed Sacrament, and that happens, I believe, at 9 a.m. on Sunday. And the other is at St. Gregory, and I believe that's at 4 p.m. Today, or on Sunday afternoon. And so those are two expressions that you could go to if you wanted to. And if you leave, come back, make sure you put your number over here, because I don't want the bishop to not give me a gold star when we do Mass counts, okay?